So this is a classic, right? And who hasn't seen this movie at this point? Well, I hadn't. I'd seen a few of the sequels, but it's Halloween season. And there was a new sequel coming out that looked pretty interesting. So I figured I'd watch this one first and then go see the new one. Makes sense? Now, I'm obviously the furthest thing from a horror connoisseur, especially when it comes to slashers. I usually prefer my horror to be a bit more psychological, so I don't know a whole lot about the genre, but from what I understand, this is essentially the granddaddy of all modern slasher movies. And having seen it now, I can see why, because basically all of the more recent slasher movies I've seen use a lot of the same techniques and tropes, which is a bit of an issue. I mean, this one came first, so it deserves the credit, but at this point I've seen it all before, so many times that it's not really surprising anymore. I've seen all of the techniques and all of the tropes, which is a testament to how influential this movie has been. But it doesn't exactly benefit the movie 40 years later, when it's all been done to death. It's essentially the victim of its own success. That being said, I still think it works, because it's so well made that it's held up surprisingly well. And it had the benefit of being the first, so it didn't need to go overboard with it. It kept things very simple and straightforward. And if I'd use 2 words to describe this thing, it would be simple and effective. They don't try to come up with any sort of convoluted backstory, or give the characters that much depth or complexity. I mean, the teenage girls are basically just teenage girls. They hang around talking about teenage girl stuff. Nothing fancy or too complex going on here. And the kills aren't all that elaborate either. It's all very straightforward. Now, it still suffers from some of the issues of being from the 70s, like the dialogue and the general delivery of the lines. I wouldn't exactly call it natural, but I think the movie was fairly low budget too, so you can't expect that much. But the direction and the soundtrack by John Carpenter has held up remarkably well. The way he shot this thing is great. He showed a lot of restraint, probably because he had to. Limitation is the father of innovation, or however that saying goes. Less is more is my point. And a lot of the times, what you don't see is way scarier than what you do see. Some of the framing and some of the shots in this thing are just pure genius. 40 years later, it still works perfectly. And there's absolutely no fancy tricks going on here. A few pans left and right, and a few strategic cuts here and there. And he never really shows Mikey's face, especially early on, or in close-ups. And a lot of the time you just see him standing there, in the distance. And you can't quite make out what his face looks like, but you get a sense that something's not right. And it takes about an hour to get into the killings too, in a 90-minute movie, not counting the opening sequence of course. And there's really not that much gore in this. A lot of the violence is actually off-screen, but most of it still works. And even when the killings do start, it still keeps this kind of slow and steady pace. It's slow, slow, slow kill. Rinse and repeat. And it never goes all out crazy. Now, to be perfectly honest though, this movie would be ridiculously easy to make fun of. I mean, it's a fairly low budget slasher movie from the 70s. There's gonna be things to make fun of, but I just feel that would be way too easy. And I feel it deserves a little bit more respect than that. Not like modern horror movies. Those I have no problem making fun of, because it's 40 years later, and a lot of them still do the same stupid shit. So they kinda deserve to be made fun of. That being said, Mikey is a bit of a slow mover, and if we really analyze it, a pretty inaccurate stabber. And he seems to have a bit of a weakness when it comes to pointy objects. All jokes aside though, I really enjoyed this movie, but it's a bit difficult to really appreciate just how good it is, since it's been ripped off so many times over the years. But would I recommend it? Sure, it's a fun little movie, so go watch it. Or don't. I'm not your dad. Or am I?